What is a credit default swap?
A credit default swap is a contract between two people, one of whom is giving insurance to the other that he will be paid in the event that a financial institution or a financial instrument fails.
So it's an insurance contract.
It is an insurance contract, but they've been very careful not to call it that, because if it were insurance, it would be regulated. So they use a magic substitute word called a swap, which by virtue of federal law is deregulated.
So anybody who was nervous about buying these mortgage-backed securities, these CDOs, they would be sold a credit default swap as sort of an insurance policy.
A credit default swap was available to them, marketed to them as a risk-saving device for buying a risky financial instrument.
But there was a problem.
Oh, there was a big problem.
What was the problem?
Well, the problem was that if it were insurance, or called what it really is, the person who sold the policy would have to have capital reserves to be able to pay in the case the insurance was called upon or triggered. But because it was a swap and not insurance, there was no requirement that adequate capital reserves be put to the side.
Now, who was selling these credit default swaps?
Bear Stearns was selling them, Lehman Brothers was selling them, AIG was selling them. You know, the names we hear that are in trouble, Citigroup was selling them.
These investment banks were not only selling the securities that turned out to be terrible investments, they were selling insurance on them?
Well, it made it easier to sell the terrible investments if you could convince the buyer that not only were they going to get the investment, but insurance.
But when homeowners began defaulting on their mortgages and Wall Street's high-risk mortgage-backed securities also began to fail, the big investment houses and insurance companies who sold the credit default swaps hadn't set aside the money they needed to pay off all the insurance contracts they'd written. Bear Stearns was the first to go under, selling itself to J.P. Morgan for pennies on the dollar. Then Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy. And when AIG, the nation's largest insurer, couldn't cover its bad debts, the government stepped in with an $85 billion rescue.